It's not a mystery that eating seafood is ostensibly healthy for you, and there's probably some good reasons for that. And we're going to interview today one of the leading researchers in the omega-3 field, Dr. Bill Harris, who's developed an innovative test, a simple, inexpensive test to see exactly where you are and then ostensibly can predict your risk for some things like all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease. But we're not only going to go into that, but we're going to go into the reasons why omega-3 can be useful for you. I think you're really going to enjoy this as we dive into the details and certainly help be informed by one of the great leaders in this field, Dr. Bill Harris.
Trying to build a case that omega-3 levels in the blood are as, if not more important than knowing your cholesterol level, at least as important when it comes to your health and being able to control it. The people, on average, were about 65. If you have a high or low omega-3 index at that age, does that predict any disease outcomes? And yes, it does. It predicts risk for Alzheimer's disease. It predicts risk for heart disease. It predicts risk for death from any cause. And higher levels of omega-3, people live longer. There have been 50 or 60 Framingham type studies all around the world. And we put all this data together from 50, 60, 70,000 people linking omega-3 levels in the blood to different outcomes. Personally, we try to eat fish a couple times a week, don't always succeed. So I do what a lot of people do. I take supplement. I take about 1,400 milligrams a day, EPA and DHA. My mantra is the omega-3 index, EPA, DHA, is what needs to be improved. It needs to be increased. There's other factors as well. It's not a silver bullet, but it's one thing you can do something about cheaply, safely, easily, quickly, and improve your omega-3 status. And there's not a disease yet that we've seen that has not benefited from having higher omega-3 to reduce risk.
Welcome, everyone. Dr. Mercola helping you take control of your health. And today we're going to dive deep into omega-3 fats with one of the leading experts, Dr. Bill Harris. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Joe. Great to be with you.
So I suspect many people know who you are, but there's probably more who don't. So I think you would be best qualified to provide us with your long-standing history in this area and what you've done in your journey to achieve the level of prominence you have in this field.
Well, that's kind of you. Just happened to get on the right horse at the right time. I think that's the way it worked out. My background is in nutrition, a Ph.D. in nutrition from the University of Minnesota. And then around 1980, I got involved with omega-3 research when I did my postdoctoral fellowship with Dr. Bill Connor in Portland, Oregon. And that's when we started studying the effects of salmon oil on blood cholesterol levels. It was really our primary interest at the time. And turned out that that's just about the time that the Eskimo studies had been reported from the Greenland physicians, Dr. Dyerberg and Bang, and they found omega-3s were really helpful for cardiovascular disease, and we were just getting into it from a lipid and lipoprotein area and platelet studies, blood clotting studies. So it turned out to be a very, very productive field, and I've been blessed to be part of it ever since.
And where are you at now? What are you doing?
Now I'm at the University of South Dakota School of Medicine, and that's where I'm on faculty. But I'm primarily a researcher at what we formed about 3 years ago called the Fatty Acid Research Institute, where we collect a variety of specialists work together, primarily in epidemiological studies looking at the relationship between blood omega-3 levels and risk for certain disease outcomes, whether it's death or cancer or heart disease or kidney disease or whatever. So we're trying to build a case that omega-3 levels in the blood are as, if not more important than knowing your cholesterol level, at least as important when it comes to your health and being able to control it.
So when you say in the blood, I would assume you're meaning not the serum, but the red blood cells, membranes?
Right. That's, thought we'd get into that later. But in principle, the test that we developed about 20 years ago is a red blood cell membrane-based omega-3 test called the Omega-3 Index. And that's the amount of EPA and DHA, the two long-chain omega-3s that are in marine sources. It's the amount of EPA and DHA in red cell membranes expressed as a percent of the total fatty acids in the membrane. So that we thought was absolutely the best way to assess your body's omega-3 status. And so we've been using that ever since.
And I'm sure you've done, but I'm not aware of it. And if I was, I forgot it. Have you done correlation studies with this, with tissue analysis, like the liver or other organs, to see how well that correlates?
Yeah, we early on we did it with the heart. We were able to get human heart tissue from heart transplant patients, actually. And we were able to show that the omega-3 level in the red blood cell was a good reflection. At least it correlated well with the heart. It's been done in a variety of other tissues since that time. Of course, you could do that in animals more readily than humans because you can't get at most solid organs in humans unless you're at autopsy. But in all cases, I think the place where it doesn't reflect as well is the brain. The brain is a very highly specialized and protected organ. We do know the DHA levels in the brain are very important for health, but whether you can, as an adult, change your brain omega-3 content by taking supplements or eating more fish, that's still an open question.
Yeah, it's an important question because from all perspectives, we all appear to be fatheads because I believe, you would probably know, is the concentration of fat in the brain is like 80%.
Yeah, if you look at lipids writ large, there's so many membranes, and membranes are made up mostly of lipids. So the brain is very much a lot of fat.
All right, well, let's get back to the test you developed and then of course we're going to dive deep into omega-3s. I'm really looking forward to this because not omega-3, but omega-6 has become an absolute passion of mine. Because I believe in excess, it is in 99.999% of the public, it leads to devastating impacts on health. So as a result, many people believe that they can balance the omega-6, omega-3 ratio, and that would provide benefit. We can certainly dialogue on that, but there's some big question marks in my mind, at least, that's not going to be quite as effective as lowering the linoleic acid content. So why don't we go into the ratio? And you discussed that it's a pretty good reflection of what's in your body tissues. We don't know the brain yet. Although that's surprising in all this time, the 50 years you've been working on this, that they haven't been able to do animal studies to come to some conclusion on that.
Yeah, well, they do animal studies. It's just they don't typically do it in fully grown adult rats, mice, and do feeding studies that give reasonable amounts. It's so easy in animal studies to give hyper omega-3 doses, huge doses that are physiologically almost irrelevant for humans because you can't eat that much. But experimenters can, manipulate the diet like crazy with animals. So what's missing is the human data. But we can talk about the omega-3 index, again, that's EPA and DHA, is a good reflection of most of the other organs. And your typical, one nice thing about it responds very well to increased intake of EPA and DHA, like a good biomarker should. And it's been linked, higher levels have been linked to better health across the board, variety of disease conditions. So I think it really is meaningful.
So what are some of the deep meanings you can abstract from finding out these results?
Well, the way, I guess it's probably easy to back up and say how we do these studies that we're primarily focusing on in the omega-3, in the Fatty Acid Research Institute. Because what we do is we access data, and there are just hundreds and thousands of data sets out there. People who have done studies over the years who have, the classic study is epidemiologic studies, as you all know, the Framingham study. Framingham is a suburb of Boston, and back in the 1940s, men particularly were just falling dead from heart attacks at fairly early ages. Nobody knew why. Thought it was genetic, maybe, just didn't know what it was. And that was pretty much the impetus for starting this population-based, let's recruit a bunch of presumably healthy men and women in a town and measure everything we can in their blood and their diet and their lifestyle, and then just watch them over time and see who develops heart attacks. That's kind of the beginning of cardiovascular epidemiology. And what they discovered in that first Framingham group was that looked like it was people who had high blood pressure were the guys who were dying of heart attacks. Guys who had high cholesterol were dying of heart attacks. Guys who smoked were having heart attacks. And so they kind of developed this concept of a risk factor that we are so familiar with now. But that was something that kind of came out of the early Framingham studies. So anyway, that cohort was recruited in the 40s. They're all dead. But in the 1970s, their offspring were recruited into the same kind of study. It's called the Framingham Offspring Study. And it's in that study that we measured the omega-3 index in blood samples that had been stored.
And what year did that start? What year did that start?
That started in the mid 70s. We didn't get so they get together. They see these people about every 4 years, roughly, to follow up who's developing what diseases, et cetera, et cetera. So in the early 2000s was an exam, Framingham Offspring exam, where they drew blood and they stored red blood cells. And it was those red blood cells that we were able to get a hold of and measure the omega-3 index in. And so we have been then doing studies asking the question, and the people on average were about 65 at the time that blood was drawn in the early 2000s. And so we are able to ask the question, if you have a high or low omega-3 index at that age, does that predict any disease outcomes? And yes, it does. It predicts risk for Alzheimer's disease. It predicts risk for heart disease, predicts risk for death from any cause. And higher levels of omega-3, people live longer. And so we've been able to do, so that's a microcosm of the kinds of studies we work on at Fatty Acid Research Institute, because there have been 50 or 60 Framingham type studies all around the world. Started for different reasons, started by different investigators, but they almost all have saved blood and they've measured omega-3 levels. And so we have a coalition now. This is actually a group that's organized out of Tufts University. Dr. Mozafarian started this thing. And this is a coalition of studies like the Framingham, like I discussed. And we put all this data together from 50, 60, 70,000 people, linking omega-3 levels in the blood to different outcomes. And so we've been publishing with that group for some time and finding, again, that higher omega-3 just across the board is just a signal for better health.
So let's get into the details. When you say the omega-3 index, is this the percentage of omega-3s, which would be, are the omega-3s just qualified as EPA and DHA, or are you using other omega-3s in there?
Just
and
EPA
is this
and DHA. Yeah.
Just EPA and DHA, which are the primary ones, of course, but there are others.
There are others.
Is that the percentage of the total lipids in the membrane, or is it? I would assume that's the case. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Okay,
yeah,
and then because there's another confounding index or ratio that's commonly ascribed, which I don't think you're a fan of, but I certainly could be mistaken, which is the omega-63 ratio.
Yeah, I would say I'm less of a fan of that than I am of the omega-3 index, and I've got a few reasons, of course. One is it's not very precise. It doesn't, as you alluded to, there are more omega-3 fatty acids than just EPA and DHA. There's DPA, there's ALA, and when you say omega-3 writ large, you don't know which omega-3s you're talking about. So that's a problem. Plus, you don't know which omega-6 fatty acids. There are about 7 of them in the blood. The principal ones are linoleic acid and arachidonic acid, but there's a bunch of other ones. And so when you say omega-6, omega-3, you don't really know what the denominator is and what the numerator is. And it presumes that all the omega-3s behave the same, have the same health benefits, and all the omega-6s have the same health benefits or detriments, which is really not true. That's not very nuanced, in my view, because we've seen some studies where some omega-6 fatty acids are apparently good. They're associated with better outcomes, whereas others are not. So to pool them into one metric where you don't know how it's made up that's another reason I don't like it. I guess the third one is you can have a high level of omega-6 and a high omega-3, or a low omega-3 and a low omega-6 and have exactly the same ratio. And it's really the amount that's there, I think, that's the most important. To me, what we're missing in America or in the West in general is we're lacking the long-chain omega-3s. That's the biggest problem. And I hate to distract from that problem by digging into the omega-6 side of it. Because some people could say, well, I can fix my ratio just by eating less omega-6 and not increasing my omega-3. And I don't think that's going to help.
All right. Well, the counter argument to that would be that there are a set of enzymes, desaturases and elongases, that take the baseline essential fats, essentially the ALA typically, or the linoleic acid, and converts them to the longer chains. In EP and DHA, the 20 and 22 chains, 22 carbons. So the argument is that if you're overwhelming the system with these omega-6s, you essentially monopolize those enzyme systems, and the availability to the omega-3 precursors for the higher order fats is almost eliminated because it's overwhelmed.
But if you're talking about actually consuming the preformed long-chain omega-3s, then
it's not an issue, right?
It's not an issue, right?
But
downstream, they're right. I know you're going to say there's other enzymes downstream that take the long chains, and arachidonic competes with those, and that's true. But there's certain metabolites of even arachidonic acid that are beneficial, anti-inflammatory. Lipoxin A, for one, is beneficial, and there are metabolites of linoleic acid itself, that don't go through arachidonic, that are at least beneficial relationships with blood pressure and inflammation, things like that. So it's a much more complicated system, I think, than just omega-6 is bad, omega-3 is good. It's just much more nuanced than that.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you report the 6-to-3 ratio in your omega-3 index?
That's one of the reports that's available from Omega Quant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so we have
I mean, we have a basic test. It's just the omega-3 index, and that's what you get. And then the next step up is an omega-3 index plus omega-6 omega-3 ratio, because a lot of people like it. They don't have to. We'll give them what they want. I don't have to like it.
All right, you don't put any disclaimers on the test when you send in the report.
We just say, here's what's normal. Here's what we think the evidence would say is a good ratio. I still like the way to fix a bad ratio. I think we say this in the report. The primary way to improve a bad omega-6 omega-3 ratio is to increase your EPA and DHA intake, because that's what I think. That's the action that follows. That will fix any ratio if you do that.
All right, and we'll get into details of that because that's where it's important. But before we do, why don't you provide the supposition as to why omega-3s are so beneficial for health?
Well, I mean, we do provide information about the benefits of omega-3.
No. I'm just to our audience now. Let us know, or summarize what are the primary benefits from your long-standing, multi-decade career in this field.
Yeah. So why are omega-3s beneficial? Good question. It's a multi-pronged answer because omega-3s are so important across multiple systems. So the first thing we knew about omega-3s was the first thing we knew about from the Eskimo studies was they made the blood, we call it thinned the blood. It made your blood less likely to clot in the wrong places. Obviously, we want our blood to clot at the right times, but when it clots at the wrong time, you can have a heart attack or a stroke. And omega-3s help prevent that inappropriate blood clotting via a complicated mechanism of how they affect the blood platelets and things like that. Second thing was it lowered triglyceride levels. Serum triglycerides are the second lipid in the blood that doctors typically look at. Cholesterol is the first. Then they look at triglycerides. And omega-3s were uniquely effective at lowering blood triglycerides.
Does it lower them more effectively than omega-6?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Omega-6 will lower triglycerides. Well, it won't lower triglycerides pretty much at all. Omega-3s are the ones that do that.
Okay.
Next thing that came along really was, I think, a blood pressure lowering effect. It had good effects on the blood vessel lining, that made it more healthy, so it would relax better, which had an effect on blood pressure. So a little bit of a blood pressure lowering effect. And then the big, I think now the gorilla in the room was an elephant. It's the primary mechanism most of us think about is anti-inflammatory. Because the omega-3s have multiple prongs of anti-inflammatory effects. As they reside in the membrane, and once they're released from the membrane, they become anti-inflammatory molecules. So those are really the big four, I think we'd say.
Do you think they play any role in membrane physiology, specifically in mitochondrial membranes?
Yeah, I think so. They do appear to help the mitochondrial membrane process the energy. Of course, the mitochondria is the energy-producing organelle in the cell. And there's some pretty good evidence, although it's not been studied extremely well. It's a fairly new field in the omega-3 story, but changing mitochondrial membranes are the fluidity, flexibility, allows the enzymes and the other proteins that are embedded in those membranes to operate more smoothly. It's kind of like having the right amount of oil in your car. It just moves more smoothly.
Yeah, one of the researchers that I interviewed recently shared that, obviously most people who study these know that they increase membrane fluidity. But what he shared with me was that they actually form structural stability factors because unlike a saturated fat or a mono, which are mostly long, simple chains, and you can compile many of them like in a rope, they're not bulky, so they really can't form these like cement, like I guess rebar in cement, that provides some stability to the membrane.
Yeah, there are some sections of the membrane which researchers have figured out. They call them lipid rafts, like a raft on the ocean. So we think of a membrane as a very homogeneous, boring sheet, like an envelope that is in a letters in. But a membrane is much, much more complicated than that. And there are sections of the membrane, the lipid, or the raft, where a lot of metabolic processes take place. And the omega-3s can improve the function of those rafts. If they're loaded with monounsaturates or saturated fatty acids, the fatty acids are tight. They stick. The membrane is stiffer in that area, and the enzymes and the transporters and the other proteins that move through that membrane can't do it as well. So they're not as efficient in what they do. But the omega-3s, because they're big and chunky and bulky, they spread it out and give it, that's at least our mind picture of it. They make more room for the proteins to do their thing.
All right. So, you've provided the assertions that the benefits of omega-3s, and, you've got a lot of data to support that. So then the obvious recommendation is, well, how do we increase our omega-3s? And this is where I think it's vitally important to understand the details, because if you fail to do that, you're going to make yourself much worse, in my view. So I'd like to see what your views are. So I believe the market for fish oils is like $3 billion. It's a pretty big market. And most of those, in my mind, should not be used for human consumption. They're synthetic. They never existed in nature before. They're ethyl esters, which is absolutely different than the triglyceride form of omega-3. And in my mind, there's a huge question if the benefits outweigh the risk. So why don't you give us your perspective on this, because this is your field.
Yeah, sure. And you're right. The natural form of omega-3 in fish, there's really two natural forms. The omega-3s are found in triglycerides, which we classically think of as oils. And they're typically about a triglyceride has 3 fatty acids on each molecule. Typically, in most fish that are rich in omega-3, there'll be one of those 3 will be EPA or DHA, so about 30%. So that's the triglyceride. The other molecule that's omega-3s are naturally found in fish is phospholipids. Phospholipid is what really makes up the primary membrane of cells. And the omega-3s, and there's 2 spots for fatty acids on a phospholipid. And it depends on the fish, but typically about maybe 20%, 30% of the phospholipids have EPA and DHA. But those 2 forms are natural. And like I picture salmon, you get both triglyceride and phospholipid in when you eat a salmon steak or any fish that's oily, high omega-3 fish. The ethyl ester, which you mentioned, is a completely synthetic product. That's true. It starts as a raw fish oil. That's where that molecule comes from in the first place. But it gets taken into a factory. The fatty acids get chopped off of the triglycerides. Typically, we're just starting with triglyceride. Chopped off the fatty acids, throw away the monounsaturates, throw away the saturates, leave the omega-3s by themselves. They have to be hooked to something, typically. And so the favorite thing is to hook, instead of a glycerol, which is what they're naturally hooked to, which is an alcohol, they pick ethanol, an alcohol. Everybody knows that one. And they put an ethyl group on the fatty acid, on the omega-3s, and then they are chemically able to separate all the non-omega-3s from the omega-3s once they're in that form, and they can concentrate them and put them in a pill. So all the pharmacological products that are omega-3 based are ethyl esters because they can cram more molecules into one capsule. That was the thought. And that's been used for, those have been used since Omicor came out, probably in the mid 1990s. But you're right. They're not natural. I guess there's debate on how effective. We do know that if you take the ethyl ester on an empty stomach, you're not really going to absorb it. They're very poorly absorbed. Their absorption can be improved if you take the ethyl ester with a fatty meal, a meal that's got some fat in it, because that will stimulate the digestive juices and allow some of it to be absorbed. But it's not the best form for absorption. Triglyceride and phospholipid are much better forms for absorption. Yeah.
And what are the concentrations? What are the concentrations, relative concentrations of the amount of omega-3 in natural forms? Is it like maybe 2/3 triglyceride and 1/3 phospholipid?
In salmon?
No, just in general. And I know there's a range, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I think it's about, in natural forms, in fish, it would be about 50% in triglycerides. Yeah, because they don't store a lot of fat. I mean, they store some. Of course, cod stores all their fat in their liver, not in the muscle. So cod, fish, it's a very low-fat fish, unless you're eating the liver or extracting oil from the liver. But salmon, mackerel, herring, sardines, those sorts of fish do store their fat in their muscle. And so it's kind of a mixture of roughly 50-50 triglyceride and phospholipid.
All right. So for the last 3 decades, we've had the industry has developed the capability of providing us with fish oils in ethyl ester form. And as you said, it's somewhat controversial, but has anyone, your group or others, examined the data out there? Because, I mean, this is a long time. I mean, and I know it takes a long while to do these studies, but certainly someone's looked at evaluating these ethyl esters with respect to consequences on all-cause mortality and morbidity.
Yeah, I mean, the first study that kind of set us all on fire was reported right around the year 2000. It was the GISSI. It's called the GISSI Prevention Study. GISSI, GISSI, is an acronym for a group of Italian cardiology researchers. So they have a group, and they did a study with what was then known as Omega-3. Now it's Lovesa, but it's an ethyl ester. And they gave 1 capsule a day of this ethyl ester to people who had a heart attack, survived it.
And how many milligrams of omega-3 was that?
840 milligrams of EPA plus DHA. Yeah, so that's 1 capsule. And they reported after it took probably about 2 or 3 years of follow-up. They reported a tremendous drop in not only cardiovascular death, but all-cause mortality. And that was with this ethyl ester product. Now, there was no placebo. It was usual care versus this 1 capsule of Lovesa. Okay.
And it was funded by the people selling the product. Imagine that.
Imagine that. I mean, yeah, I guess that's
conflict of interest.
Well, every drug is a conflict of interest, right? Everything. Yeah, exactly. But they were trying to get a approval for selling this as a pharmaceutical. And the reason they want to do that, instead of selling it as a supplement, is you get insurance reimbursement. For pharmaceuticals, you don't get them for dietary supplement, even if it's the exact same molecule. Right. So it's driven by a desire to make a profit. And Pronova was the company at the time that was doing that. And that's what they did. And that tradition has been continued. And unfortunately, there have been several studies where they've used Lovesa or Omega-3 or other similar ethyl esters that did not show a benefit, didn't show any harm, but just didn't show the benefit. That was seen in those early GISSI studies. And so that's dampened enthusiasm pretty much after 2010, over the last maybe 15 years. Several studies have been reported that were not successful, with one exception, which is called the Reduce It study, which we used an ethyl ester, but it was an ethyl ester just EPA only. This is a product that was originally developed in Japan and found its way into a more worldwide distribution. And the company Amarin, an Irish company, picked up this drug and decided to test it in people at high risk for heart disease. And they gave them 4 grams a day of EPA ethyl esters, no DHA. And versus a placebo, which has been quite controversial, whether there really was a placebo or not. They used a thing called mineral oil, unabsorbable oil, that you need a placebo of some kind. You need some kind of a control group to compare. And they found after 5 years that there was a marked, like 25% reduction in cardiovascular risk, risk for total mortality, risk for non-fatal heart attacks, It was a slam dunk, great outcome. Surprising, I think, to many people. But there it was. And it looked very good for the omega-3 space. And the FDA has given that company approval for an indication to give it to reduce risk for cardiovascular disease. Previous to that, the only real FDA-approved indication for omega-3 pharmaceuticals was you had to have very high triglyceride levels. And that's what they're for. And of course, doctors can prescribe things off label if they want to, and so they could be prescribed for other reasons. But that's the FDA approval. So Amarin, for its product Vascepa, the EPA only ethyl ester, they got an approval for cardiovascular disease reduction. The controversy around that has been, did the omega-3 product actually lower risk, or did the placebo increase risk for events? And that's been hotly debated. Of course, if your placebo really is harmful, it will look like even if your drug does nothing, it will look like it's doing great because it's doing better than the placebo, which is supposed to be neutral. Well, mineral oil there is considerable evidence now that at least some of the apparent benefit, probably not all, but some of the apparent benefit of the EPA ethyl ester was derived from a worsening outcome in the placebo group.
Yeah, mineral oil is not a food. It is not a food. It can only do bad things to you.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're taking 4 grams, almost a teaspoon of this stuff a day for 5 years. I mean, that's just not natural at all. Nothing close.
Yeah, most likely, it's going to contribute to some fat-soluble mineral and vitamin deficiencies. It's going to just excrete them out of the body.
And they talked about also, many of these people are on statins. In fact, I think everybody was on a statin because they were all high risk for cardiovascular. So that would potentially maybe prevent the statin from being absorbed well too. But there's evidence on both sides. It's a hotly contested issue, but there's a cloud hanging over the Reduce It study. Unfortunately, DHA tends to get vilified, by the folks who, right. But I think DHA is great. I think you need both EPA and DHA.
So you can certainly make a strong argument for that, but I don't know that you can make the argument and extend it to most supplements, especially synthetic supplements. I think there's pretty good.
And by that, you mean the ethyl ester?
The ethyl ester, yes.
Yeah, because if we keep running down the different forms of omega-3, of course, krill oil is an important contributor to the omega-3 space, and that's a natural product.
100% natural, mostly phospholipids.
Mostly phospholipids, right. That's good. And then there's these things called restructured triglyceride or re-esterified triglycerides. So they're omega-3 products that are back in the triglyceride form, but they've been put that way by a chemical company that has thrown away the non-omega-3 fatty acids and stuck the omega-3s back on this 3-carbon glycerol backbone. So you really can't call it natural. The triglyceride is a natural product, but a tri-omega-3 triglyceride is not a natural product. Yeah, I mean, is it bad for you? I don't think so. But if you want to be picky, there's only krill oil or phospholipids and triglycerides, natural triglycerides that are unmolested by. I guess you can't even say that because there are certainly the cleaning up process when you get raw fish oil. Nobody's putting raw fish oil into capsules. They have to be cleaned up.
They have to be. Toxins that are in the ocean, so that has to
right.
be.
Well, and there's some odors that are not very pleasant either.
And those odors, and actually the human nose is a very sensitive instrument, even probably more sensitive than some of the tests they use to detect them. But these peroxidized lipids, rancid lipids, are very dangerous to health. And that's one of the problems with omega-3s and actually any PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acid, is that these double bonds are highly susceptible to oxidative damage. And you have to be absolutely committed to the highest level quality to protect the protection. Usually vitamin E is a pretty good solution, but it's got to be followed through the whole chain.
Yeah, right. And they exclude air from the whole processing chain. Do it under nitrogen, which is not reactive. So the best the best producers are very careful, and it makes the products more expensive because it just takes more effort and more expensive chemicals to do it. But
yeah, for sure. It's a little bit easier to do with krill because it's in the phospholipid form. But anyway, that's another rabbit hole I want to go down now. But one of the potential variables that contributes to the benefits that you've described earlier from the omega-3 supplementation or increase in the diet would be two substances, or resolvins and protectants, or group of substances. And I am confused as to how those are derived. Are they actually in the fish, the oil initially, or are they derived metabolically from the original fatty acids?
It's kind of both. There's a whisper. There's a small amount of some of these resolved. These are metabolites of EPA and DHA that can be found in fish oils, but it's like less than 1%, for example. Most of it is made in your body on demand. If you've got the omega-3s, EPA, DHA in your membranes, in your cells, when you have an inflammatory insult of some kind, these molecules are synthesized, the resolvins, protectants. There's a few other classes, but just the general idea is these are molecules that you're designed to actually resolve, hence the name, resolve the inflammation. We used to think that when you have an inflammatory insult, you have the inflammatory response, and then it just goes away. It just goes away, which is not a very scientific explanation of anything. And Charlie Sirhan, really at Harvard, has been the leader in discovering that inflammation doesn't just go away. It actually gets driven down. It gets resolved. It gets pushed. And it's these omega-3 products that are doing that pushing, that are driving those inflammatory processes back into a quiet state. So if you haven't got the omega-3s, the inflammatory response stays longer, and it becomes a little more chronic. And that's, I think, the problem.
So do you think it's the resolvins and protectants that are metabolized that produce this suppression of inflammation, or is it more the prostaglandins and eicosanoids that are derived from the omega-3s that are responsible for lowering inflammation, or is it both?
I think it's more the resolvins and protectants. Those are the molecules that are more so than the cyclooxygenase products, the prostaglandin type products, which are also important. There are so many different metabolites from EPA and DHA, and we're learning the dance. It's a concert. It's an orchestra. All these molecules doing different things on demand. Some of them are suppressing even the receptors on the cell that will sense an inflammatory action happening in the body. And if you suppress that action, the cell doesn't make inflammatory. So it actually suppresses the inflammatory response, which is good to a point. As well as once inflammation starts, the omega-3s will suppress it to keep it from getting out of hand. But it's the resolvins and protectants that are doing that latter thing. They're actually actively suppressing or reversing.
I wasn't aware of that. That is interesting, and especially in light of the fact of information I learned about linoleic acid. I published a narrative review on LA in July in Nutrients. And one of the reviewers gave me feedback and said, listen, because I purported one of the mechanisms was it actually increases inflammation, and that the speculated consensus is that linoleic acid is converted to arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory. And then he responded with this review that showed that the actually conversion from LA to arachidonic acid is pretty minimal contribution to arachidonic. And I couldn't dispute it. I mean, it was solid evidence. So then I just capitulated and said, okay, well, that's not the mechanism. And just like you referred to with the resolvins and protectants, it's the metabolites that are so key. And in LA, it's the metabolites that destroy your health. which are typically most of the metabolites, which are referred to as oxalams or oxidative linoleic acid metabolites, which like 4-hydroxynonenal, malondialdehyde, glyoxyl, methoxyglyoxyl. There's hundreds of these toxic reactive aldehydes that get spun off from LA that make it so perniciously dangerous.
Does that happen in vivo? I mean, does that happen in vivo? Does that happen in
100%. No, you don't have to have McDonald's French fries to get these things. No, they're there if you heat up the oil. But no, this spontaneously happens at biological temperatures for sure, unless they're protected well with vitamin E. Then that peroxidation is pretty radically reduced.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought this. It's an interesting topic because this group of researchers at the FORCE Coalition, we've looked at blood omega-3 levels predicting outcomes, right? Health outcomes. We also have looked at the same studies, the same blood samples, the same people looked at the linoleic acid levels in the blood. And we've asked the same question. I mean,
by blood, you mean the red cell membranes?
Well, it can be plasma linoleic acid, plasma phospholipid, or red blood cell. They all kind of like the omega-3s. They correlate with each other pretty
well. So even so the serum correlates with membrane fatty acids too. But it would seem to me it would be changed based on your last meal.
Well, yeah. And linoleic acid in the blood, of course, can only come from diet. As you know, it's an essential fatty acid. But it's particularly in the West, as you know, we've had a lot of linoleic acid in our diet for decades.
That's a profoundly serious understatement.
Fair enough. So what you eat today, it really isn't going to bump your linoleic acid. It's kind of buffered already, so it doesn't really change very much day to day. In fact, you just alluded to the point that the conversion to arachidonic acid is very minimal, like 1%, something like that. And when they use radioactive tracers to look and see how much shows up. So the linoleic acid and arachidonic is pretty well regulated by systems, how much level we should have. But when we've looked at linoleic acid levels in the blood, I mean, the hypothesis would be, if the idea that linoleic is bad for you, higher levels of linoleic in the blood should predict long-term adverse health outcomes. That would be a reasonable hypothesis. And so when we've looked at that, we've looked at it for two different diseases, for cardiovascular outcomes, whether it's death or events. And we've looked at it for developing diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And in both cases, the higher levels of linoleic acid, the lower the risk for those two diseases. And so so it's the opposite of the idea that it's bad for you. It looks like if it was omega-3, we'd say they're good for you because higher levels of omega-3 associated with better health outcomes. So now we're finding higher linoleic acid levels in the blood are at least associated with better or lower risk for heart disease or diabetes. And so you've got to think, well, okay, how do you explain that? What do you do with that? How do you square that with some of this chemical evidence that you're talking about? Some of these metabolites.
Well, and epidemiological evidence too. I mean, the incidence of heart disease has increased over 5 million times. Heart attacks were essentially an unknown commodity in the United States. The first reported heart attack in the United States was 1912. And now it's 250,000 people dying a year. And yeah, there's a lot of variables that contribute to it. But for me, the evidence is beyond abundantly clear. It's the industrialized processed seed oils produced in the U.S. Civil War, started being produced then, and then it gradually increased. So that study site is intriguing for sure, but I'd like to dive in details because I'm virtually close to 100% convinced that it's wrong, 100% wrong.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'll send you the papers. You can have a look at them, see what you think is. But it does require some explanation if we're going to hypothesize that linoleic is bad for you. I mean, it's certainly possible that seed oils could be bad for you. It doesn't have to.
No, let me be more precise. Excess linoleic acid. Your body absolutely requires linoleic acid. If you didn't have it, you would have severe health problems. But it's almost impossible not to get enough because it's in every food. And it's questionable whether or not to call it essential. Yes, I mean, technically it is because your body cannot make that from scratch. But if you're eating food to stay alive, you're going to have more than enough. So is it really essential?
Yeah. I guess if you're doing the pure nutrition definition,
Yeah, it have to be, but
it's essential, right?
But pragmatically, it's not.
Yeah, it's there everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
What would you recommend the percent of calories as linoleic?
Well, it's not me. I mean, even the hyper conservative RDAs are 2% of total daily calories. The average person is at 25%. I mean, this is a highly damaging fatty acid that just is taking an excess. I mean, so the bulk of that is industrially processed seed oils. And I don't think any rational scientist or someone committed to integrity is going to deny that we should be avoiding processed seed oils like the plagues, unlike what the American Heart Association was recommending in the 50s and still to this day, because when you increase seed oils, you actually lower cholesterol levels, which they believe is a healthy thing, but that's a whole other area we don't have time to go into now, but it's not.
It's complicated. It is complicated for sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I guess I would push back on your 25% of calories as linoleic acid. I think the evidence is more like it's 6 or 7% in America.
Oh, no. I mean, tissue biopsies are 12 to 13%.
Well, I mean, it's dietary intake, not necessarily tissue levels. Dietary intake. I'm sure you can find tissues where it's that high.
Well, 99% of the fat consumed in the United States in the 19th century was from animal sources. That obviously can include fish, seafood. Today, it's 80 to 90% are from seed oils.
Yeah,
we totally switched it. We swapped it.
Animal fat really isn't milk, cheese, dairy, beef, pork, chicken.
Yeah.
They've all been.
Yeah. That was pretty much the only option people had in the 19th century. And now it's been villainized and demonized.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's saturated fat has been an interesting topic, as well as dietary cholesterol.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, that's the simple data. The data is we went from 99% to basically swapping it around all with vegetable oils. I mean, that just ancestrally, historically, and just logically doesn't make any sense that it would have some serious impact, most likely negative on human health.
Well, yeah, right. Certainly before you could actually mill grains and press oils out of them, you were just eating the natural oil that was in the kernel of corn or a kernel of wheat, right? There was not much there. And sure.
So anyway, we went on a tangent because I'm passionate about this, but what I wanted to get back to, and we started with, is your affirmation that you're in agreement with that synthetic fish oils are probably not the best idea, and it's certainly controversial and a debate in the field. And so we get back to the recommendation. What do you do? What is the recommendation? How do you get increases omega-3s in your tissues?
Yeah, and the question we often get is how much EPA and DHA do you need?
Yeah, that's another good question for sure.
To get and so it gets back to the omega-3 index as your marker of your omega-3 status, your omega-3 meter in your blood. Most Americans are around 4 or 5% of EPA and DHA in red cell membranes. Okay, we think the target ought to be 8 to 12%, somewhere up in there, at least over 8%. So the levels are at least half of what they ought to be in America. How do you do that? How do you get up there? From our studies, it looks like if you want to go from a 5% omega-3 index to an 8%, takes roughly 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams a day of EPA and DHA on average.
And what ratio of the EPA DHA?
It doesn't really make a lot of difference. I think we always advocate both of them together, whether it's kind of 60-40 mix or 40-60 mix. Is, just don't do 10 to 90 mix,
And it becomes less of an issue if you're eating whole seafood.
Totally. You get both of them in a fairly even mix in seafoods, whole seafoods. So roughly that 1 gram a day is a great target for most people. That's 10 times what the average intake in America is right now. So even a gram a day doesn't seem like a lot, but relative to what we're eating, it's a lot. And that's about what it will take. When you look at a Japanese population where they're, at least historically, the traditional Japanese diet, not the current one, which is becoming more and more westernized, sadly. Their intake was roughly a gram to 1,200 a day, and their average omega-3 index is about 9 or 10% in those days. So it fits, and the Japanese, it's a great, you can't pin it on the omega-3s, but I like to try. Japanese do live about 4 years longer on average than we do. They have higher omega-3 indexes, but they smoke more, they have more hypertension, they have more stress, things that should shorten their lives. But in reality, their lives are actually, they live longer, very little heart disease. They have strokes because they have a lot of salt in their diet and they have high blood pressure. So you can cause hemorrhagic strokes. But the Japanese experience is certainly one of the pillars of the evidence that higher omega-3 levels are good and safe.
Do you think the hemorrhagic strokes might be partially attributed to the increase in the omega-3s? Because one of the things they do are antiplatelet or antithromb.
That's true.
Right. They would likely increase the bleeding time.
And that's been a concern. But when it's been looked at in clinical trials or in observational studies, there's no increase in clinically significant bleeding. And we've looked at, we're about to publish a study in one of our collaborative things with, like 70,000 people, looking at the relationship between omega-3 levels in the blood and risk for stroke. So 2 kinds of strokes. One is the more common stroke where it's a atherosclerotic clot. So you have a brain infarction, a thrombotic stroke. The other kind of stroke is what you're talking about, is a hemorrhagic stroke where you bleed. And we actually found higher omega-3 is reduced risk for the first kind of stroke, the thrombotic stroke, and no effect on hemorrhagic stroke. Whether you're high or low omega-3 did not increase your risk for
That's good, because most of the strokes are thrombotic, so overall,
in the West, right, certainly. Sort of like heart attacks, right?
Yeah. Interesting. So what do you do personally or recommend personally? It would seem, from my perspective, the ideal is to get it from seafood. Now, that's not convenient for a lot of people, and a supplement might be a wiser choice. So why don't you walk us through your interpretation of the data and conclusions?
Yeah, me personally, we try to eat fish. I mean, I live in South Dakota, okay, so, but you can get fish anywhere.
Yes, of course.
We have Costco here, right? Come on. You can get salmon, whatever you want. So we try to eat fish a couple times a week, don't always succeed. So I do what a lot of people do. I take supplement. I take about 1,400 milligrams a day, EPA and DHA. And my omega-3 index is about...
Is that supplement an ethyl ester?
No, it's a restructured triglyceride.
Okay, so it's not, as we discussed earlier, not totally natural, but a lot closer than an ethyl ester.
Right. And it does the job. And take it with food. Always take it after a meal. So it's absorbed best.
But it sounds like your conclusion is that ideally the whole food or the seafood approach, a clean seafood, of course, you don't want to be eating shark or whale or tuna because of its high concentration of heavy metals. Yeah.
Well, right. And that is always the recommendation. Go food first if you can. But as you alluded to, just because you think that's the best way to do it, if people don't do it, then you got to give them a plan B.
Yeah, it's the same thing with sunshine. I have not swallowed vitamin D supplements for 15 years, and my levels are very rarely go below 90, and typically in the summer over 100. But, I still capitulate and say, listen, people don't have the opportunity to live in subtropics like I do and go outside every day around solar noon. So, then if they're confined to the indoors and unable to do that, then you probably should take a vitamin D supplement.
Yeah, right. It's the same. Right. You got to be practical.
Yeah, pragmatic for sure. So, where's the best way to get the omega-3 index? And not the cholesterol, not the 6-to-3 ratio, the omega-3 index. We're really precise here.
As long you can have the ratio if you want it, but we'll give you the index too. That's the one I think is actionable. That's fine.
Yeah.
Omega Quant, OMEGA, Mega Quant, quantify.com. You can order this test directly. It's a dried blood spot test. A kit is sent to your home. The basic test for the omega-3 index is about $50, I think. And you get a report about 5 days after it's received in the lab. You should get a report of your omega-3 status. And I always recommend.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I love it. It's a test we developed 20 years ago, and we've still love to see it more in clinical medicine. Love to see it as common as the cholesterol test.
I agree. I think there's a lot more value to it, and it's really convenient because you don't have to get your blood out to a lab to get your blood drawn. You get to draw it yourself. I think is it one spot or two spots on the card?
One spot.
One spot. Okay, one drop. So yeah, it has to be a good drop. You got to fill up that circle, but it's pretty easy to do.
I mean, I think we're offering now. I think most cards have 3 spots, and you can fill 3 spots. And then if you decide you want your vitamin D done or your hemoglobin A1C, then we've already got the blood there, and we can do it. You can change your mind. But for the omega-3,
what's the charge for the vitamin D?
That's also $50.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, because even the wholesale costs for physicians and that's the 25 hydroxy D, I'm assuming, right? Yeah, so that's a pretty good deal, actually. All right, so if you want your vitamin D, I think everyone should get their vitamin. Talk about tests as every bit as important as cholesterol, if not more, would be your vitamin D.
Vitamin D, right?
Yeah, because there's no way there's no way you know what your blood pressure is. You don't know what your vitamin D level is or your omega-3 level. I mean, you can get some idea because you know what you've been eating. But when it comes to vitamin D, I mean, I guess you know what you've been doing with respect to the sun exposure or swallowing your vitamin D, but it's still, you've got to measure it. That's the only way to know.
That's the only way to know. Everybody's so different too.
Yeah. Wow. Any other insights you'd like to share with us?
I guess, how would you wrap it up? I think my mantra is the omega-3 index, EPA, DHA is what needs to be improved. It needs to be increased. There's other factors as well. It's not a silver bullet, but it's one thing you can do something about cheaply, safely, easily, quickly, and improve your omega-3 status. And there is not a disease yet that we've seen that has not benefited from having a higher omega-3 to reduce risk. So
I'm wondering if you integrate a vitamin E recommendation while taking omega-3s or food sources.
We have not. I certainly understand the logic of it. That's very reasonable. I guess I've not seen the damage that you're talking about. I have not particularly looked for it. Okay. That's the other side.
And this is, if you're doing things unnaturally, which certainly taking a synthetic fish oil is, and you're taking it in excess, trying to achieve these benefits you ascribed to omega-3s earlier, I mean, it just seems obvious you're going to get damage because it's totally unnatural and you're pushing the system where it wasn't designed to go.
Yeah.
And there's biochemical solid evidence that this is a potential risk of increasing oxidative damage. The proof is they're essential. You got to have them. You need them.
Right.
But in excess, the key is in excess is where the issue becomes.
Right. And then that becomes obviously a definition of excess.
Right.
And that's
all right. Well, this has been great. I thank you for all your wisdom and sharing it with us and kind enough to do that and help us understand some of the mechanics of it and offering a practical tool to help us assess where we fit on this goal. And it's relatively inexpensive and convenient, which is it's a pretty good combination.
That's what we hope to do. It's been fun talking to you, Joe. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. And all the best.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks so much for watching. Remember, hit the like and subscribe button so you can get more videos that can help you and your family take control of your health.